Our mean time between Waymo, I think, is 60 seconds right now. If we're walking around, we see an average of one Waymo every minute. Our mean time between Teslas is 30 seconds. I'm super impressed with how well, like Austin a year ago, FSD had a lot of wonky failures. The data gathering that you want for end-to-end is not recording robotaxis, it's recording humans driving. You need 100,000 vehicles kind of as a minimum that are human driven. And like literally nobody has that fully instrumented except for Tesla. Yes. Like there's literally not another manufacturer in the world that has the fleet.
You know, my math says that when Tesla starts scaling, they're going to net something like $50,000 per vehicle that they put on it per year that they have.
You know, one of the things about Xerox PARC or AT&T Bell Labs was not just that they were great places to get like all kinds of useful ideas for future technology. They were also a way to basically pay all the good talent to not work for the competition. The people who go to startups and the people who go to bigger companies, the temperament is very different. A friend of mine described it as the difference between like regular Army and the Marines, right? Where I guess he was in the military and he said Marines take ground and Army holds ground. Like if you are a Marine by temperament in an organization that's very Army focused, then you end up being kind of this, you're like a sliver under the skin of the organization or something. It develops an immune response to you gradually, starts to constrain.
I think Sam is incredibly talented, but I don't trust him further than I can throw him.
And Gates was he was hyper competitive, really focused on competition.
Yep.
Not just out competing them, but like breaking their knees.
Yeah.
I used to think, he
didn't want to be the best. He just wanted to destroy everyone else.
He was the Tanya Harding of business. Man, people have it so good today. They just have no clue.
Does it feel like the standard mode with the Robotaxi software is a little bit more smooth and a little bit more chill than your versions of 13?
The dynamics aren't dramatically different. It's a bit smoother. There's a couple behaviors that are different. I noticed that so far speed bumps, watching behavior around speed bumps, it seemed like it was a lot more conservative. But then I drove a couple more neighborhoods and it seemed like maybe it was a little more variable. Then last night I went through a bunch of neighborhoods on V13 and the Cybertruck, and it was also being pretty careful here. And I know from years past that speed bumps were like a thing it wasn't great at, and not like occasionally you'd hit them pretty hard. And yet, when I first got here, it seemed like it was being over cautious. But now I'm used to it, it seems like about right. It seems like the speed bumps are pretty well tuned in. So far I haven't seen like any really noticeable. The biggest behavioral difference that like really stands out to me is that the Robotaxi version of software seems much better in parking lots at maneuvering. Like when it gets to the destination, it's driving a lot more confident. It's not wasting as much time. It's kind of like the V11, V12 kind of thing, where it went from being kind of hesitant to being pretty confident. So I'm guessing they've either done a significant amount of mapping work on parking lots to give it a better sort of reference base to work off of, or it may be that they've, it's just
if the Cybertruck
tuned up better.
Notices. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, I keep thinking that the Tesla drivers will be a little bit more observant.
Yeah.
And so far,
I was, when I first got here, like every new Model Y I saw, I was thinking, is that a Robotaxi, right?
Yeah.
And none of them were, right? Every single one of them had a driver in it. So
yeah.
I think they're still really diluted out in the population of Model Ys.
Yes.
So, you stop looking after a little while, right? Because you're just not getting anything. Aside from the Robotaxis I've called, I haven't seen any. Which, I guess, admittedly, they don't stand out as much. I've been seeing a ton of Waymo. Like, Waymo wasn't operating here the last time I was in Austin.
Yeah.
So it still seems weird to me to see them. But in my neighborhood in San Francisco, our mean time between Waymo, I think, is 60 seconds right now. If we're walking around, we see an average of one Waymo every minute. Our mean time between Teslas is 30 seconds. So like, there's half as many Waymos as there are Tesla, and there are Teslas everywhere. Like, it's super common to stop and see 7, 8 of them at an intersection waiting on a light. You know?
Yeah. Your mean time between doesn't account for density of how many you'll see at the same time either. So it's like,
we actually have a clicker when we're out walking in the morning. Like, Karen will like count them, and then we'll divide it by the number of minutes we're walking to get them.
Okay, so
it's a real number. Like, we actually measure it.
It's not just the time in between the sightings. It is the total number.
It's like how many you see over a 2-hour period. Basically.
Gotcha.
We have a regular route we walk, and it takes about 2 hours in the
I think
morning.
there's a good chance that is a Robotaxi right there.
The hazards. No. There you go. Yeah.
It seems like every time I'm out in one, I see several along the way.
Really? You've seen them?
Mm-hmm.
Huh, wow. I haven't seen a single one aside from the ones I called.
Yeah, and probably because on the days, especially on Sunday, I think people just happen to be going from and to a lot of the same places.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be why. I've been going really functional places. Like, I needed to buy sunscreen, so I found a Walmart and went there. Or I needed to eat, went to a restaurant. I tried picking what I thought would be a popular bar to go to the other night, but then I got there and it was closed. Even though Google said it would be open. So. But I worked in a fiber optics company designing. I'm an electrical engineer and design communication electronics, and so I ended up working in a fiber optics company doing optics related stuff, which I'd never done before, but they needed people to do it, and I could learn to do it faster than they could find other people who could. I went there to do software projects. I mean, I went there to design, metro ring communication systems, but I was designing like FPGAs and ICs and writing software backends and that kind of stuff. But they really needed optics engineers. And so my boss was just like, you can learn to do this. And he just put me in a lab and said, here, start designing transceivers. So I had a 6-week crash course in optics. And then I became the research lead at that place gradually over the next few years.
And was all your experience writing backends and doing FPGAs and stuff, did that translate over fairly well or help you, or was it really just completely kind of different?
But like, my history with work is go get a job, that you feel like doing, and learn on the job and then do it. I didn't finish college, actually. Like, I don't have a degree. I went to high school. I went to Caltech for a year, and then I left and started a company, and then just kept doing companies after that. So, like, no formal training. But, if you have high agency, you can learn anything on the job pretty quickly.
Yeah,
which it's
and
really
no one
obvious
cares
now.
after you've done something.
It's I always got hired by people who I had worked with before.
Yep.
So they just hire me because they knew I could figure it out. So yeah, so it was fun. I got to do a lot of different kinds of stuff. I designed optics and optical systems. I designed fiber optic interfaces. I designed integrated circuits. I worked on electromechanical systems. I designed parts that went into production lines. I wrote tons of software in many different languages. I designed FPGAs back when they were a really new thing, and then I spent a bunch of time building FPGAs, built microcomputers, embedded systems, wrote production line tooling, just like whatever it took to make it happen. Right? Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Swiss Army engineer.
Which, I have to imagine people who can do that variety of things that live in Silicon Valley have no end of projects that people want to pull them into.
And it's not hard to get a job there, like no matter what kind of engineer you are, because the employment appetite is voracious.
Mm-hmm.
But a thing that kind of surprised me, because I started out just doing startups, and the people who go to startups and the people who go to bigger companies, the temperament is very different.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine described it as the difference between like regular Army and the Marines, right? Where I guess he was in the military, and he said Marines take ground and Army holds ground.
Yeah.
So in startups, you're taking ground, right? And you want people who are more adventurous, and they're stimulated by the
chaos and the novelty.
Yeah,
and
they like the idea of wearing multiple hats and and having their job change all the time. But I was surprised after
and not having someone looking over their shoulder, like figuring stuff out on their own.
There's a lot less bureaucracy and red tape and that kind of stuff. But the flip side of that is that there's no safety, there's no assurance,
Mm-hmm.
there's no regularity, right? Because your job will be different in 3-6 months. And I learned later, after working at bigger places, and one of the startups I worked at ended up becoming a much bigger place, and so I got to watch the whole evolution.
Yeah.
Once you start getting bigger, people want a predictable job, they want a predictable paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
They want to come to work, get a paycheck, go home, play with their kids. And that's most people. That's 80-90% of people are like that. So, and as you get to be bigger, it gets to be really hard to hire the really adventurous types.
Mm-hmm.
So I end up being more and more out of my element, right? But then
Yep.
you end up being this, like if you are a Marine by temperament in an organization that's very Army focused. That's interesting. It's not liking the blinking red light. Or rather, it's not ingesting it properly.
Figured it out eventually.
Yeah.
That's good.
Then you end up being kind of this, you're like a sliver under the skin of the organization or something.
Mm-hmm.
It develops an immune response to you gradually. Starts to constrain. I was lucky to have people that I worked with that would, throw me at projects. But the final straw for me working in bigger companies was designing really great stuff that the company then would decide that they weren't going to take to production because they didn't want to disrupt the market. Like they wanted slow evolution, and I wanted things to change really fast. So I had to go.
Yeah, they could. Was it one of those things where they could predict, all of the cash flow and the business around what they already had, and introducing something new is like, well, we don't know what that's going to do, and if it's going to, like, I guess, is it self-disruption or disrupting other people's stuff, or both?
I mean, yeah, both. An easier way to just describe it, like all those things are true, because bigger organizations, they have lots of people and lots of different opinions. So it's easy to find a cohort of people who has any particular opinion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So characterizing the organization overall is a little harder. But the simplest broad characterization is the organization became very conservative because after the dot-com crash, they had a near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so management saw the company like almost, we started out in an industry where we had like 20 odd competitors, and 10 years later we were the last man standing. Like we had seen everybody else succumb and we had almost succumbed ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that made at that point we had thousands of employees in many facilities, including overseas and whatnot. And management properly are like, these people have jobs. We don't want to gamble them.
Yeah.
So they just became very conservative. I didn't want to work at a place that was conservative.
I never really thought about dynamic of really what it takes to build consensus in an organization, you know, once it gets to scale, as being such a big factor in the culture before. But yeah, that's got like, I guess I'd always really looked at it through the lens of, you know, reading Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma stuff and how people at the top are trying to, you know, drive culture of innovation or not. Yeah, I guess for some reason I had never really factored in how consensus building impacts, you know, management, and then in reverse how management handles consensus building.
Yeah, organizations they're highly variable, right? Like different companies can have really different cultures. Leaders have influence, but they don't have total. The culture will tend to win out, even over really powerful leaders. Leaders that can go in and actually change culture are pretty rare, and attempts to change culture, they often involve effectively destroying a company and rebuilding it from scratch. Like, you know, what happened to Twitter, right? That was radical surgery, you know. And that's kind of the level of thing that has to be done to change a culture in a company, like once it gets established. And then
but even so, it all, like, I've been thinking about that recently, that of Elon's companies, you know, it doesn't seem like X is as Elon culture as some of the other companies from, you know, they're still around, they do ship product updates, they don't seem to be moving as fast or fixing as many things. It's like, how much of that is cultural hangover and how much of that is legacy code base hangover? You know, is it going to get there, but it's just gonna take still a few more years worth of work?
What was that about XAI or X?
No, X.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to judge externally what's going on, especially, you know, the crop of companies that Elon runs. The narrative surrounding them are like intense and highly divisive, right? So a lot of things that I think are not true take off and become kind of presumed to be true, like not just because media fabricates them, but also because, okay, interesting, nicely handled, but because fans are also super intensely looking at every tidbit of information, and then they tend to expand things beyond, you know, what's probably true about them. And then those things, like I've seen a ton of things that are not true about FSD and autopilot take on the veneer of truth because people just keep repeating them. And so, like, if you're looking through that lens and trying to figure out what's going on, you can get a really distorted impression of what's going on internal. I noticed that the occupancy rate of the Waymos I've seen is really low, which, like in SF, you see Waymos, the occupancy is around 50-50. Like half of them will have somebody in them. So half the cars are deadheading, half the cars are getting rides.
Making money.
Yeah, since I've been here in Austin, though, it seems like the deadheading percentage is much higher, which makes me feel like they're probably running a lot of test routes.
That would make sense.
Yeah, they're still warming up.
How hard is it to see if there are people in the back seat of the Waymos?
It depends on how bright it is outside. Sometimes it can be really hard to tell. Gotcha. The tinting on the rear windows is really dark on those cars.
What location is this thing? There's a bunch of Teslas out here.
Just turn
by. Seems like this might be a good home base potentially for charging some Robotaxis. Slowing down below the speed limit for some of the bumps. Earlier, I think we were talking about differences that you feel between the Robotaxi software and 13, and I don't remember if we ever got to finish that conversation because I think I interrupted us looking at that Cybertruck. Was there anything else that?
I mean, there's lots of minor feature differences. I'm mostly paying attention to the dynamics to get a sense of whether or not the driver itself has changed. You know, I think I said that the biggest distinction seems to be like it's got a lot better handling of parking lots for drop off, and it makes sense because you know, for Robotaxi, drop off and pickup are way more important than for FSD, right?
Yep.
So that was one. I'm super impressed with how well, like Austin a year ago, FSD had a lot of wonky failures in Austin. That Austin has a lot of interesting kind of highway topology. I mean, it's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, but the thing where you've got lots of high-speed highways going through the city with access roads next to them, and then you have instead of, you know, most places have access to highways tends to happen at intersections. So Austin, it's kind of like, you know,
the frontage roads.
Yeah, they do frontage roads, and then the ramps are in the middle of a stretch of road. They're not at the end.
Yeah.
So you get this thing where you have these really short ramps, and it seemed like the Austin maps had a thing where they would mark those ramps as like 30-mile-an-hour speed. So you'd be on a 50-mile-an-hour frontage road, and then you'd hit a 30-mile-an-hour ramp, and then you'd be on a 70-mile highway.
Yes.
You know, all in short order because the ramps would
And
be,
humans know just do 70 on the ramp so that you can.
yeah.
merge.
So that's, I mean, there's a whole bunch of like little kind of edge casey things that happen with that topology that you don't see it in Virginia, you don't see it in LA, you don't even see it in Dallas, right? Because Dallas highway system's a lot older. And central Houston is the same. Like the outskirts of Houston have some of that stuff.
Yes.
But,
Yep.
so there was a lot of weaknesses.
There is a fair bit of that in some of the suburbia around DFW, but not in downtown Dallas. And I think I've never encountered that specific dynamic anywhere else besides Texas, so I don't know if it really is unique to us or
It's probably not entirely unique, but I've used FSD and AP in most of the United States at this point, and I don't remember. I mean, every place has its own like weird topological issues with the highway system. Like I was on the East Coast one time, and I had friends that were out there who were pointing out they have this weird kind of ramp conjecture where they do like a clover leaf, but the highway portion of the clover leaf, like you loop on and then that ramp immediately loops back off. So you have to loop on and then merge. And then the thing is, you're merging off of a lane where people who want to exit are merging on.
Yes.
And those things, they're only the length of the underpass. So they're really short.
Yep.
And they would see high failure rates because at the time, AP was too timid to basically be able to aggressively make a lane
Yep.
change in the presence of traffic.
Yep.
But I took it out there. I did a bunch of those ramps and whatnot, and it was true that it had a relatively high failure rate, but it wasn't true.
So this is the page, like the Wingstop is right over there that I was parked at yesterday. And yeah, this was where I hailed my first one from. But anyway, sorry. Yeah, it's just those underpasses.
Yeah,
You were doing the AP
It wasn't a
testing?
safety issue, but it was like
Yes.
there would be like essentially navigation failures that were induced by the car's inability to rapidly make a lane change in the presence of other traffic. If you did it when there wasn't traffic, it would be fine. But it would be more hesitant if it like had a car approaching rapidly from the rear in the lane that it wanted to merge into. Okay, so that HEB. I mean, that was just one example. I mentioned, I think when I was on that last chat with you, Farzad, about that, Texas has that rural thing where they frequently will, they'll have like 70-mile-an-hour rural highways where the right lane is used as an on-ramp, off-ramp for, trucks that are merging on and off of the highway. And so the convention on those highways is that through traffic uses the center lane and not the right lane.
But then you have other ones where there's a big fat median in between and it's 4 lanes, and then the center lane is for the people to slow down to then get in a little tiny turn lane that they don't leave any room for. And so it's like there's not a safe, easy heuristic for do you pick right lane or do you pick left lane?
Bike lanes are a new thing, and I mentioned this before too, that bike lanes are a new thing that lots of municipalities suddenly adopted, and they took different. In fact, Austin is interesting, and Austin's approach to bike lanes is different from other cities that I've been in. That the way the place they put them, and the fact that they use the plastic bollards to separate them from traffic in a lot of places. Austin makes pretty heavy use of plastic bollards to separate traffic, and
this will be interesting.
Yeah, perfect, right?
Yeah.
And the end-to-end human mimicking is such. I don't know if I told you this, but I think Waymo switched over to it about 6 months ago in San Francisco. Because prior to that, it had been a lot more mechanical, and suddenly got much smoother, and it felt a lot closer to the V12 Tesla, and it felt like V11 FSD prior to that.
Well, I mean, you would expect that of all the people trying to do this, that Waymo would be the one company that would actually have the AI chops and the vertical integration in their training.
So Waymo has a big disadvantage with respect to end-to-end. And this is something that most pundits don't seem to realize, that the data gathering that you want for end-to-end is not recording robotaxis, it's recording humans driving.
Yes.
So Waymo doesn't have a giant fleet of human-driven vehicles that they can gather data from.
Unless Waymo doesn't, but Google does via YouTube and all of the many hours of...
It's not quite the same thing.
It's not the same.
The quality of data that you get from YouTube is super limited. In fact, Tesla's approach to using YouTube data was they basically used it to build a simulator and then trained in simulator. But the thing is, if you use it to build a simulator, the systems driving in the simulator aren't humans, right? At the end of the day, if you want to gather human data, because human drive data is super noisy, so you need a really large amount of it that you can sift through to find the quality stuff that you want to train on. And that means, you need like 1 billion miles of stuff as a starting point, which means, you need 100,000 vehicles kind of as a minimum that are human driven. And like literally nobody has that fully instrumented except for Tesla.
Yes.
Like there's literally not another manufacturer in the world that has the fleet.
I've heard kind of different things, and I just don't know nearly enough about BYD. Some people says, yes, they're using a vision-based system now. They've switched over to it, but I have no idea how many BYD cars actually have that system. Like, who's,
Well, Tesla.
as far as you're aware, who's the person who has the next best ability behind Tesla to begin gathering the data?
If BYD has a high camera count vehicle that's got 6-7 cameras observing all directions, they haven't been making it for more than a couple of years, so they can't have more than maybe 100,000 on the road or something.
Yeah, and it's certainly not all their cars, all their lowest priced vehicles.
Yeah.
And, yeah,
The
which is
large
what they sell
majority of
the
their
most
stuff
of.
is strippers, right?
Yeah.
They make a lot of different models. They equip them different ways. They seem to change models every 6 months, and I don't pay attention to it.
What do you think about Comma's ability to? I mean, they don't have millions of cars on the road. They definitely have thousands of cars on the road, but they have much lower quality cameras, many fewer of them.
Cameras are obstructed to
Yeah.
the sides and rear pretty severely. But the Comma's technical approach will work, but it requires the software to get dramatically better
Yes.
than it is today. If they're going to try to do the thing, if they're going to try to, say drive unsupervised in cities. Potts had said that he thought they would be number 2.
And being what, 18 to 24 months behind? Roughly what I remember. I think that's what he said.
Maybe. The underlying tech is moving fast enough that that's not implausible. But at the point when Hodge made that statement, we were in a really different place as far as what direction the tech was going and how fast it was maturing. Oh, interesting. So is that mapped or is that sensed, I wonder? Here we are.
This is the, get to drop right on the pin.
Okay. Another more pedestrian entertainment.
I couldn't even see her from where I was sitting between the seat and the A-pillar. So, yeah, on the, won't they use their own custom mapping solution for Robotaxi service areas? Part of me thinks that it's likely because if they can get some additional safety performance out of that while they're doing this rollout, that it makes 100% sense.
In the short run, it'll be a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
They'll have places they overmap because it's worth it. It's like yesterday I saw a high top scanner on a red Model Y driving through town.
Yeah.
That seems like
With the LiDAR stuff
Yeah.
or something.
It's not, other people can buy Teslas too. This is not guaranteed that it's Tesla. I didn't notice it had manufacturer plates on it, but makes sense.
But the other part of me thinks, with Elon and his distaste for crutches and half measures, be like, no, I want you guys to figure out how to do it without that.
So the baseline level of publicly available road data just keeps going up and up. And the more vehicles are constantly mapping, that quality comes up too. So I think it's, you don't want to need it, but if it's there and you can get it for cheap, being able to use it is an advantage.
Yeah.
And I would expect,
As long as it doesn't have too much noise in it.
yeah, that's in the, if you can use it, right, the quality has to be up there. Oh, I didn't look to see what the pin was going to be yet for the drop off.
Oh, yeah.
So let's see. Yeah, looks like it's in the front of the target.
It'll go take us down past
Okay.
the Target.
So you'll get to test the dropping off at the storefront in a big parking lot. Let's see. It's 10:44 a.m. on midweek, so the Target's not going to be super busy, but there will be people there. Yeah, so this is better than I think 13 handles. Just the bog standard 13 handles the parking lots right now. I think this is us. Looks like, or no, it's gonna go a little further.
The pin is still up
Yeah.
a little ways, so I think it's just obeying
Go into the address.
and obeying the stop signs in front of the thing.
Yeah. Okay. Tries to move out of the way. What were we talking about?
We were
Oh,
talking
the-
about perplexity,
Yeah.
and then pickup points. Yeah, it is just nice that I think they do a good job of searching first, gathering all the source information, and then letting the LLM, make sense of it or reason about it instead of the other way around.
Perplexity is much less like it has less bias toward relying on what it already knows instead of the search data. Like it leads with search and then synthesizes what it's got. Perplexity also, they invested a ton of money in building their own crawler and their own search index, which I think other organizations also do, but like Perplexity doesn't rely on like Google for search. They have their own giant RAG database that they can pull a ton of stuff from. And I don't know if that informs the the prompts and stuff that they use for processing this stuff, or if it's just that they have a really large amount of pre-digested search stuff. So they're basically ingesting a lot more search as a proportion of the information that goes into the mix.
Have you spent much time listening to, is it Arvind or Aravind?
A little bit. I've watched a half dozen interviews with him.
How do you
I first started using Perplexity because I saw he did an interview. I forget who. Oh yeah, it was a Lex interview. Yeah. So that was, it was interesting to hear I think that was probably the first kind of significant exposure interview that he did. So maybe that's what it was. But a lot of things that they were talking about in the interview sounded interesting. So I went and tried it for like a day, and then I subscribed to it to get the pro version.
Yep.
Like my experience with the services is there's a qualitative difference in what you get if you pay for the thing versus using the free version. Yeah, so now I subscribe to like 6 of them.
Yeah, I guess I'm subscribed to 3. I think I pay for Gemini, I pay for X, and so I have paid access to Grok, and I pay for Perplexity. Yeah, I was pretty impressed with Arvind in that interview, and I don't know, that's one of the, I guess, key leading indicators that I look for in companies that I either want to invest in or products that I want to try is like, does the CEO, are they interesting? Do they reason well? Do they seem like they're high integrity? Which is one of the reasons I don't like, I think Sam is incredibly talented, but I don't trust him further than I can throw him. And so I just don't want to use ChatGPT because I don't trust him.
It's amazing how people respond to him. Like I respond to him that way too, but I find it really interesting that his, he's got a lot of charisma. He's incredibly well spoken.
And he's super smart.
No, unquestionably, he had a tremendous experience. as a startup person. I think he ran Y Combinator for a long time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he knows his way around a startup. It's just, yeah, like everybody I know that has, concerns about OpenAI, their business plan, using their service, whatever it revolves around, the edges of the guy's personality. He's just like too slick a salesman kind of thing,
Well, and when you combine that with just the word of mouth about people that have worked with him in the past, there's always like something slimy that ends up happening at some point. And
I think there's this kind of mismatch between the public persona that he presents and the industry guff about him, right? That, you inevitably you hear this stuff that basically suggests he's an incredibly hard-nosed businessman. He's incredibly strategic. He can be really ruthless when it comes to like the interests of the business and that kind of stuff. But you listen to him and it's all touchy-feely humanitarian, and you feel like you're being fed a line.
Yeah. Which I think, I wonder how much he looks up to Jeff Bezos. I don't think Jeff had a reputation for being slimy, at least not that I'm aware of. But he obviously
It's
had a
kind
huge
of-
reputation for being hard, like ruthless
Or
I don't know. Yeah.
I grew up
Hard-nosed.
competing with Microsoft, and like you compete with Microsoft, you compete with Oracle or Cisco, and like if you haven't done that, you don't know the meaning of it. Or Intel, like Intel would cut your throat bleeding on the corner. Like all of these other companies that seem like they're ruthless today are just like, it seems like junior high school ruthless compared to like Amazon is so warm and fuzzy compared to Intel,
Microsoft.
or Microsoft. I mean, and a lot of that, Gates really set the tone for the culture of the Microsoft forum, and Gates was very, the means don't matter, just the end, and he was hyper competitive, really focused on competition, not just out competing them, but like breaking their knees. I used to think, he
didn't want to be the best. He just wanted to destroy everyone else.
He was the Tanya Harding of business. And the philosophical school that he comes from, like that's all fair play, right? Like all that stuff is on the table. And the world has shifted since then. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, or like the 50s, captains of industry, they had a very different kind
They
of
just
philosophy.
operated, legitimately in a much more zero-sum environment. Like there's
They played hardball.
a level of unconstrained upside that comes along with this era of how much mileage we get out of Moore's Law, that I don't think that
That's a
just
good point.
wasn't the case.
The rising tide has been, the 80s culminated in, the tail end of the Volcker contraction. So, the 60s and 70s had stagflation. The 50s had consolidation post World War II, super, brutal in a really different way. And then, 20s and 30s, robber barons, Great Depression, roaring 20s, and a generation of people who had a way harder life.
Oh my gosh,
And
yes.
like my dad grew, I literally, as a junior high school kid, ran a farm in rural, Iowa, because his dad got his arm stuck in a combine. Right? Like the stories my dad has about, like getting up at 4 a.m. in the wintertime and your overalls are frozen solid, having to light the cast iron stove in the room, put the overalls on the stove so that they would melt, so you could get up before dawn
and freeze your butt off
and work for 4 hours before you go to school. And I think his dad's stories are even more brutal than that, and his grandfather's stories are just like crazy. Like I listen to those guys and I'm like, man, people have it so good today, they just have no clue.
I just think about my grandpa's life and like how hard his life was compared to my life, and even just that is huge. He was a World War II vet, and he served in the Pacific Theater, and so like, and he died before I was ever born, because in his struggle with PTSD afterwards, he abused alcohol for years and years and years, and drank himself into, I think it was finally his 5th heart attack that got him in his early 60s. And yeah, like that's, and his life is still, while difficult, a lot easier to probably get along with than, like you said, just a generation or two before that, where everyone in the entire country essentially just worked on farms or with animals. Like, that was pretty much it.
Yeah, but getting back to Jeff Bezos, I feel like he was the first kind of captain of industry that got it in his head, of the modern era, like post-internet era, that got it into his head that social attitudes were just not receptive to that. And the fact that Amazon, like his philosophy regarding managing Amazon has always been super customer centric, right?
Yeah.
Not in the way, and he's customer centric in a different way than like the Apple, Steve Jobs, Tim Cook thing, where Jobs really cared about public perception of the company. Like that was really important. And Bezos kind of was way less worried about PR and more worried about like, is the customer who orders something from us, are they having a good experience or not? Because he felt like in the long run that'll dominate. Like you don't have to worry about what the newspapers are saying, and they kind of didn't. And it's funny that we now, we're now kind of in this era where media and popular opinion are so hard on tech companies because they are so friendly compared to previous generations of, Howard Hughes, holy cow, that guy was like, people looked up to him, and he, and Andy Grove, the guy's a legend and whatnot, but man, he was brutal. And like with respect to competition and that kind of stuff, like, Intel lost they lost an anti-compete trial. IBM, Microsoft, Intel, they all lost these things, and every single one of them deserved to, because they were playing so dirty in terms of like spending enormous amounts of money to like, kill the competition in the cradle kind of stuff. Or, the whole Intel inside marketing thing where like they were literally paying people not to buy the competitors' chips. Right. I mean, you couldn't literally write that. They didn't write that in the contract, but it was really clear from the structure of the details that that's what they were doing. That's so like overtly monopolist. It's not even funny, and nobody does that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say that Mark Andreessen is another one that I think he's a founder that has had just absolutely tremendous amount of impact on the world that I think goes largely unappreciated. That like the fact that we have an open internet instead of an AOL, and then on the back of that, even though he got killed by Microsoft, and then it was,
well, you're talking about Netscape, which, Andreessen, he wasn't really a founder there. He was like this college kid who came out, who had the tech and got funded by other people. And the company was really run by other people. Like he got a chance to be there watching it happen.
And it was his, the browser was his technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was much more at the tech end.
Yeah.
And like he learned the business end by being like having a front row seat to all the stuff that happened. Netscape took off, he became super wealthy, and then, went on to fund lots of other things through A16. And he's become quite the startup entrepreneur. More, and an interesting way, like most of the VCs that fund like early stage startups don't actually have a lot of in the trenches tech experience. That's one of the things that makes VCs or YC special, is that they're also not like that. But most of the VC money is in more traditional VC places where they wait for the angel round to finish and then they come in later and they have their set of incentives and their limited partners and stuff. And Andreessen, he didn't fall into that hole. And I think part of it was because he had insight into the psychology, you know, the experiences of the people, like what it takes to make technology. To actually be there doing the thing, as opposed to be an MBA off at the side, like, you know, trying to build a business case and make all your decisions in a vacuum that's full of business people and who don't really know the operation side of things in technology. Yeah, I mean, he's a singular personality for sure, but he became much more interesting later. Like, he really, I mean, he had a lot of influence because, you know, he developed early tech, and then he had some influence over the way Netscape evolved, and that was such a fundamental, you know, event or that the internet ended up forming around. Did you ever, you know, Bill Gates, he wrote this book called The Road Ahead.
I've never read
You know
that.
about it? It's funny. It was just before. Don't bother. Yeah, you know, ask ChatGPT to summarize it for you. Yeah, ask for like a 2-page summary or whatnot, and you'll get the gist of it. But it was Bill Gates basically saying this is before the internet took off. The internet, as we know it today, took off, and it's basically a book where he's talking about what the future of connected computers looks like, and he's totally predicting like the cable companies are going to win, and they're all going to be running our software, and you know you're going to have it's like he basically looked at CompuServe and Prodigy, and he said this is the future. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be CompuServe and Prodigy and cable companies, you know. Like he saw the internet totally as a private thing that was owned by people, where he had a couple of big monopolists that basically controlled the whole thing. And so you would get a subscription to the internet and it would come with all your services. Right. And it's funny to look at it now because it's so completely, like, this was his vision, right? This is the thing he really believed in. It was also the thing he was pushing. It was the thing he wanted to have happen. It was the thing he fought for. And then the internet happened. He wrote that famous, you know, internet tidal wave. That was his way of giving so I don't know if you know, it was like he wrote this famous memo that went out to everybody in Microsoft, which was the first time he'd done it after it became a big company. It was titled the Internet Tidal Wave, and he was like, okay, we lost, we have to pivot right now. Essentially every single product, like the heads of every single developer, you know, like Word and Windows, or like everybody had to basically tell him how they were going to put the internet in their product, and he pushed everybody to do that. And there was this huge scramble, and then they poured enormous resources into Internet Explorer to make it the dominant browser when they saw that was the way that it was going, and they went after Netscape absolutely ruthlessly. You know, and like Steve Ballmer got caught saying one time, there's this famous quote about how we're gonna cut off their air supply, right? Essentially, and that's what they did. Netscape was trying to build a business on, at the time, you sold software. You didn't give it away for free with your operating system. And Netscape was trying to sell a browser, and Microsoft was like, no, we're going to make the browser free. So these guys have that was the cut off the air supply thing. And that was what ultimately did in Netscape. First they tried to sell browsers, and that didn't work. And they tried to sell web servers, right? Because that was the other technology that they really had. And then Microsoft gave away free web servers. You know, they had a free web server you could get with the operating system. And that was one of the reasons why they ended up losing Antitrust later. But, you know, they weren't, we're going to make a better product. We're going to own this market because we're going to kill all the competitors, and then we can charge whatever we want. You know, and while they wouldn't say that, they wouldn't put that in an ad. But they said it really clearly to each other in meetings that, you know, which is why it's actually kind of shocking that when you consider the political climate that they lost that trial in, it was super, you know, it was the Chicago School of Economics was the dominant theory. Like you let businesses do what they wanted to. It was so hard to lose an antitrust trial in that climate, and yet they did. Like, that's how egregious they were.
Hubris.
They just, you know, I think they internalized, you know, if you take the sort of libertarian ideal to the extreme, what you get is everything's fair, everything's on the table. Like, you know, it's all priced in, and you can do whatever you want. And the public basically decided, the courts and antitrust law decided that, spending a large chunk of your business trying to kill other companies is not what we mean by competing in the market, right? We want you to compete by making a better product.
Yes.
So.
Or doing something that someone else isn't doing yet.
Yeah. Better product, right?
Yeah.
Make something that doesn't yet exist. Make something that does exist better.
Yeah.
And that became the criteria that I later decided was sort of my threshold for business ethics, which was how much of the resources of the company, the intellectual effort, the manpower, the strategic direction, that kind of stuff, is devoted to stopping other people from making good stuff, and how much of it is going into you making better stuff, right? And this is one of the reasons why I love Elon's companies, right? Because he really clearly, devotes zero effort to even thinking about what other people are doing. He's just focused on making the stuff his companies make better.
And it's so impossible that just that is an all-consuming.
Yeah. Well, if you're relentless enough, he clearly really believes that the only real moat is the ability to the willingness to work really, really hard to just make you're so relentlessly intense that people can't keep up with you, right? That your moat is you run really fast. It's the classic, we still talk about startups and they have an exit, right? Which is when the founders get to cash out, go live on an island, buy a yacht or whatever the deal is. And he's just from this alternate school, which is you never cash out. You work hard forever. Like the work itself is the reward. It's not like the way you cash in so that you can go someplace else and then some Harvard MBA can run your business into the ground afterwards, right?
Yeah.
He and the end product isn't just like making a good company and making a bunch of money. It's like, the metric is, it's not just lip service.
Did you accomplish something that was actually extremely useful to the whole world?
Did you make the world better?
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I guess it was new language somewhat that I hadn't heard from Elon that was in his YC interview the other day when Gary was asking him, I think Gary asked him, how do you look for the right people to hire? And he was like, well, first you have to do something useful. And I guess I had always looked at the intensity as the end, almost. It's like if we're intense and we're doing something big and compelling, then there's a Zooks.
Yeah. Those things are super common in SF too. I've been watching them. They have a purpose-built Robotaxi, no steering wheel and whatnot that they're running around San Francisco also. But they've had a ton of those cars. Yeah, it really is. For the longest time, those are just mapping platforms.
Yeah.
But then, they're functionally mapping platforms. I think they're running their AV stack is in there. But I've never seen one that wasn't being manually driven. I'm sure they have them. I'm sure they operate them in that mode. But they're doing the cruise Waymo strategy on steroids. It's an Amazon company, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's under Bezos' umbrella.
Gotcha.
And I feel so bad for those guys, right? And so many people worked so hard for so long on the wrong technology for getting autonomous vehicles working, and then they've been living in this, motivated reasoning, confirmation bias space for so long.
Yeah, everyone else is doing it this way, so it must be right.
Yeah, they're totally sleeping on the correct approach.
Yeah.
And you get this momentum. You've got tech debt, and
and you feel like you're making progress. You don't realize that you're in a local maximum.
They're not even in a local maximum. Given enough time, they'll get there. Waymo's demonstrated you can make a service out of it. It's just too slow. that was, several years ago, I started getting really disgusted with the fact that Google was so timid. I mean, before they spun it out as Waymo, that they just weren't moving very fast. And I remember I had a bunch of very public arguments with people who are like, no, this is the way. I'm like, how can you not see that you're never going to get there if you don't speed up? But it's the Google way. I'm kind of surprised they didn't start, one of the classic Google things is something's not working, you just start an independent team to do it a different way when you let the two compete. It's a thing like Amazon did that consciously. Like they make internal competitors and people have to compete to make the same stuff. Google, I think they do it unconsciously. It just kind of happens because they've got so much money that they could just, somebody else has a different idea and you don't want to step on the toes of the people who are working on the current project, so you just start another one. It's like, what the heck? It's only money.
It's like 0.01% of the money printer.
Yeah. Well, it's also, there is this, one of the things about Xerox PARC or AT&T Bell Labs was not just that they were great places to get like all kinds of useful ideas for future technology. They were also a way to basically pay all the good talent to not work for the competition.
Yes.
This is the thing I ended up doing. Like the last several years I was at my last employer, it was really clear that they were just didn't want me to go work for somebody else, and they didn't really care what I did. Right. Which was, I got to do lots of fun and interesting projects, and I did probably the most interesting and impactful stuff I'd ever done was in that window of time.
Hey everyone, this is Future Hans. So as you can see, that was the end of a Robotaxi ride that I had with James. And between that ride and my last ride with him, we actually got into a very interesting discussion regarding Hardware 3, its limitations, the possibility of continued software progress for Hardware 3 that actually makes it as functional as current Robotaxis. But then also the logic behind whether or not Tesla will decide to do that versus go ahead and upgrade the hardware. And that was a fascinating discussion, but unfortunately I did not record while we were having that conversation. And so I don't have that, but fortunately for us, Dave Lee did have a similar conversation with James, and that video dropped yesterday, and he's been kind enough to let me take a portion of that conversation and cut it in here to give you guys the same information, and then we'll pick back up in Ride 5 after that is done here in about 16 minutes. And so we're going to go back to James and Dave now, and we'll see you shortly.
So do you think the version they're talking about with like 3 or 4 more times parameters, is that version 14, you think, or?
They can name stuff however they want. I don't think if the question is, do you think like that's a major rewrite, kind of like, maybe not. If they keep the architecture the same and all they're doing is increasing the number of parameters in some of the layers in order to increase accuracy, that's not really an architectural change. You're just going to get more accuracy by, throwing more compute, in the systems operating at the edge. So they could do that, but you wouldn't think of that as like a major upgrade. It's more like, kind of a feature change that might lead to qualitatively better behavior, or it might not. It's kind of interesting that they haven't increased the parameter count. I think Elon said something about increasing the parameter count about a year ago. He was talking, that was when we first started getting, I think early versions of 13 were saying, and coming soon, it had the, 3x more. And we haven't been told that the parameter count's gone up. Now there's, talk about this 4.5x maybe parameter up increase. Who knows exactly what's going on. What it feels like is they were able to continue getting better performance without having to increase the parameter count significantly. So they just didn't. They just kept refining the architecture that they had. So now when they think about, going up they're thinking about something different than they were thinking about before. Or alternately, maybe they did do the thing and it just never was reflected in the notes. It doesn't feel like there's, at any point since 13 came out that there's been like this discontinuous improvement in smoothness, which I think if they kept the architecture the same and all they did was train it harder on a model with more parameters, so they basically get higher accuracy, the main thing that you would notice is it would just be smoother. Like, decisions, there would be a lot fewer decisions where it was uncertain about what it was doing. And it's definitely gotten better, but there hasn't been this discontinuous step where, suddenly it felt like the network would be 3-4x bigger. So that would be my guess. Oh, and another thing that's interesting to me is that hardware 3 has significantly less resources in terms of, our understanding when 13 came out, initially they only pushed it on hardware 4. And, the thinking was that it took some additional work to get that down so that you could make it work on hardware 3. Hardware 3 never got a version that was named V13, but at the same time, 12 got a lot better during the window of time that 13 was out. And, I spent a bunch of time in hardware 3 cars, and my sense of them is that, aside from the smoothness thing, and there's some features that you don't get in 12, that you get in 13. But in terms of like if you're using it for road trips, if you're using it for driving around town, that there's not actually a huge difference in the true functionality. I think 13 is significantly more confidence inspiring.
Yeah, that's what I see. It's like because we have a hardware 3 Model Y, and it's good, especially the latest versions of 12. But on the 2026 Model Y with the hardware 4 with 13.2.9, it just has that extra smoothness, extra confidence, extra responsiveness. It's just, it just feels like a more refined version.
Yeah, we have a 3 that has hardware 4 and the latest 13 on it, and I have an S that has we have a 3 with hardware 4 in it and the latest 13, and I have an S that has hardware 3 and the latest 13 on it. And I do notice, there's a noticeable difference, especially the difference is small enough that like if you'd only ridden in the cars like 1 or 2 times, you might not notice. Yeah. But if you drive them regularly, you definitely notice it. On the other hand, I don't feel like there's any routes that I am comfortable in on one car versus the other, or like I said, there's some features like, probably summon, that kind of, corner case stuff might be different qualitatively.
Do you think just in hardware 3, they're just running a quantized version, of the same neural nets with maybe a couple less features like, I don't know, summon and other stuff?
I mean, they're both going to be quantized to death.
Yeah.
They're probably 8, maybe 4-bit. The neural network processor in the hardware 3, if they use the same architecture they had in the patent, it's optimized for doing 8-bit quantized networks, which is what they were doing on the GPU, the GP106, before they got hardware 3, right? So it was optimized for that. I wouldn't be surprised if they're quantizing at 4 bits now. The field as a whole has kind of found that quantizing at 4 and 6 bits, you can get, depending on exactly what you're doing, you can get performances very comparable to 8. You definitely wouldn't go higher than 8, but the networks, they're probably not training at 8-bit fixed point. They'll be training at either BFP16 or FP8, maybe, depending on the hardware they use in the training cluster. So the dynamic range of the D types that they're using is definitely going to be more quantized in the cars. So in that sense, hardware 4 and hardware 3, they're both going to be quantized. Hardware 4's got the capability to run networks with more parameters in them, and I'm guessing that they probably do. So the difference would be not so much quantization as distillation would probably be the way you would go. Although it's pretty likely that they train a reference network and then they distill it down to something for hardware 4. They distill it separately for hardware 3, and both of those targets are quantized.
So the rumors are, AI 5, hardware 5, probably coming out sometime. Who knows exactly when?
Well, the rumors are it's going into production, and it starts with the Cybercab whenever they start production on that, right?
Yeah. Do you think they'll start Cybercab production this year?
25?
Yeah. Or do you think
I mean, they've got a whole new production line that they have to bring up for it. So I imagine that the ramp, the early parts of the ramp are probably really long.
That's true.
And I think Lars has said something along the lines of, the production line itself is in pretty advanced stage of development. Also, if they're doing Cybercab on an unbox process, then that's going to be a radically new production process, and you can imagine the early production ramp is going to take quite a bit of time. So there could be a really long tail at the front end of production. So at what point do you say it's in production? Like when they've built 100, when they built 10, when they're building, 1,000 a week.
It would be cool if, they built at least 20 or 30 by the end of the year and actually deployed them on, the streets.
At prototype phase, you could probably build, most of the vehicle, and, for the few odds and ends that aren't out of production right now, you hand build those, or you build them on a prototype line or something. And so you've got, maybe a 90% production car, if they even think it's worth it. I mean, they've got limited prototypes that they can use for doing stuff like, getting reference data for and we've seen Model 3s that are outfitted with Cybercab camera mounts, right, for gathering data. So they've got other ways of doing that. So I don't know, how much weight there would be on.
Do you think Tesla will retrofit hardware 3 cars with AI 5 eventually to skip 4?
My guess, okay, I think I'm on the record at length on this topic, but I don't think the jury is out on being able to make a software package for hardware 3 that will work for FSD as it is. And my napkin math tells me that if for instance they wanted to upgrade the whole fleet of hardware 3 cars, that's roughly a $10 billion expenditure.
Oh, wow.
And something like a year of work to do it. Like even once you get once you develop an upgrade kit that they can install in 30 minutes or something, it's still a lot of money and a lot of technician time to outfit that fleet of cars. So I say this not as like a suggestion that, maybe it wouldn't make sense to upgrade the cars, rather that if you can do it with software, you're going to save that $10 billion expense. I think they probably have a decision point coming up once they start seriously ramping the Robotaxi. I think there's going to come a point where they're very much limited in terms of the number of vehicles that they can field, and the number of hardware 4 vehicles that they can either produce or that they can. We don't know yet how many retail customers are going to lend vehicles to the fleet. That I'm sure they have their best guess on that kind of stuff, but it's the kind of thing that you won't know until you start doing. So there's going to come a point where they're capacity constrained in terms of the number of vehicles that they have, and but if you get to that point, there's a lot of incentive to start retrofitting hardware 3 cars if you don't feel like the software at that point is ready to do it. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, the upgrade package, it's not something that they're going to be able to do in 3 months. You're going to have to plan it out well ahead of time. If AI 5 is built to run in bursts as opposed to flat out continuously, so right now, as far as we can tell, both hardware 3 and hardware 4 run continuously at a constant frame rate on the current networks. If AI 5 has significantly more sprinting speed than say thermal envelope that it can run at flat out, you might have a situation where you've got an architecture that naturally you can just dial the frame rate up and down. And so you could retrofit that into hardware 3 cars and run it at whatever frame rate the power and thermal envelope allow. The thermal envelope that you can get in a hardware 3 vehicle is really high because it's liquid cooled. The power, they're limited to like something like 100 watts, so they might have to run auxiliary power for it. Yeah, so the hardware 3, AI 5, the hardware 3 upgrade thing, that's a pure economic decision as far as I can tell. Like I tried to look at it a couple different ways. They can definitely build an upgrade package to upgrade those cars. Like it's definitely not, there's no technical obstacle to doing that. The obstacles are, it's going to cost money, and then it's going to take time, because all these cars have to come in. You can get the install down. You can make it like the hardware 2.5 to 3 upgrade. If they have to add auxiliary power, like if they feel like they need more than the 100-watt power envelope, and there's a decent chance that even if they did a hardware upgrade, they wouldn't need the power, because the original 14 nanometer chip. So now, we don't know, but the rumor is they're building at 3 or 5 nanometer. If they're building at 3, 5, 7 nanometer, they get a lot more compute inside the same power envelope. So they could up the compute maybe 5 or 6 times in the same power envelope, and maybe that's enough. These are all, a lot of these decisions, there's this trade-off between the amount of compute you use and the accuracy, and that trade-off between compute and accuracy, as the technology gets better, you get better and better accuracy at a fixed amount of compute. So, and you don't know exactly what that number is going to be. So there's an economic incentive to put off the decision until you understand what the trade-off is going to be as well as possible. But you want to be able to make the decision soon enough that you can do the thing, and not, my math says that when Tesla starts scaling, they're going to net something like $50,000 per vehicle that they put on it per year that they have. And so, 1 million vehicles is $50 billion a year of profit, not revenue. The margins are so high that revenue and profit aren't so different, but like it would be super painful to like not have, to be able to have demand that you could be satisfying for 2 million vehicles that you can't field, right? That's $100 billion in profit. So the economic forcing function is really powerful, but it's not super clear externally from what we know about what's going on. Like, when is the point where, they could really use those 2 million extra vehicles and they don't have them, and they wish they had built the upgrade package so that they could have upgraded the hardware 3 cars ahead of time. Like right now, I would guess that the point when they would need to start doing the upgrades, like they will certainly, once Robotaxi starts ramping, they'll have good visibility into like at what point that needs to start happening. But at that point, the point when it needs to start happening might be a year away, right? But it's not far enough away that they can wait to start designing the upgrade package. Like I would guess they've already designed an upgrade package, and maybe they've started fabricating or whatever. And
all right, that concludes this section with Dave Lee. Thank you again to him for allowing me to put that in here for you. And their conversation was incredible. And so if you have not seen the full Dave Lee and James Douma conversation, I would highly recommend it. I have the link in the description below if you'd like to jump over there and watch that video. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cut back to my last ride with James. We're going to pick up in the second half of my conversation with him about that very same topic of hardware 3 to a potential AI 5 upgrade, and some of the decisions that Tesla's going to be facing as they think about what they're going to do there, and what some of the limitations and possibilities might be. And so back to the last ride now.
Yeah, so we're talking about the power envelope and those. If they upgraded, regardless of whether or not they do the second power cable, do you think that they would upgrade cameras for hardware?
And they
3
can.
during the process.
They have to build a custom camera for it because the 3-4 cameras have a different connector. But you know,
Can they do an upgraded camera that uses the same cabling system?
yeah, they
for
should
the-
be able to. So I think I haven't actually looked at the cabling, but the typical way these things get hooked up is you got a mini coax that runs. So you have a serial protocol that runs across the cable in a certain bandwidth, and then the DC power is fed on the same pair. You use a coax to get shielding and signal integrity over the distance faster, and plus immunity from noise and power and all kinds of stuff. So the cables themselves, they have really good bandwidth, and typically the limiter on, like, the biggest change is you switch to a new camera IC and you need more bandwidth to carry the higher resolution signal. But at the same time that, you know, the cable, the base signaling rate on the cable might not meet the target for the bandwidth that you want. The thing is, in the 5-6 year period in between, the transmitters and receivers get better, right? And so you can get more bandwidth over the same cable. So from a tech standpoint, it's absolutely doable. The bigger hurdle is you got to convince the people who make the camera ICs to like do this. And you know, Tesla's buying the cameras right now as an assembly from a provider, and so they have, it's a you know the exact number of vehicle, the largest size of that market that there is, but how much is it worth to them? Like, if they're in a position where, that you either do it or you give up a $50K a year revenue stream per vehicle, well, that's a no-brainer, right? Because, the whatever they do with the cameras is going to be cheaper than not having the vehicle on the street. I mean, like, the business logic is, there are lots of situations where you're trying to figure out like what the business model around the decision is, and it's kind of, it hinges on, plus minus 10%, 20% decisions, and then it can be, you might not know within 20% what something's going to cost or how long it's going to take. But when it's like plus minus factor 10, and you can predict way ahead of time, well, I know how this decision's going to go when the time comes, right?
Yeah.
And this is like, it's a weird space that we're in, it's rare when you have, market opportunities where, the plus minus is a factor of 10 as opposed to 10%. But the thing is, it makes certain things get really easy to predict when you're in that situation, and that's where we are now.
So if those things are true, I guess I'll start with the camera issue. To me, the added complexity of doing a camera installation, I guess maybe
they're super simple. They just pop out and the new one snaps in
on all
the cameras,
all of them.
They're designed to be replaced if they fail.
All around. So how much that, like, if it was 30 minutes before to do a computer, if you want to do computer and cameras, do you go from 30 minutes to
an hour,
45, an hour? Okay. So yeah, it's like, but if you're talking about doing 3 million cars and it's 30 minutes extra to do cameras, it's like doing the camera upgrade due to the added complexity of the install is kind of a significant, like, if you can get by with just doing the computer,
that's true. But once again, it's an economic decision, right? So
exactly.
You just, what's the opportunity cost? What's the economics? Like, how much safety margin are we willing to pay for? Are we willing to pay for any? And so it's not like I don't think you need them. In fact, the better the compute and the better the algorithm gets, the less you need good cameras, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you have to look at the totality of the system, really, which to some extent, doing the evaluation can be kind of expensive because, you got to train up a big new thing maybe from scratch if you're working from the native resolution of the cameras and whatnot. So it's not, but the there's some latency in the decision because there's a certain amount of work that you have to do. But the cost of making the decision is probably pretty small compared to what you're likely to be giving up if you don't do something.
Which, then that brings me to overall, like you decide that you do want to enable those 3 million hardware 3 cars potentially, if and only if there's more, like the speed with which you can scale up the system is limited by your new vehicle production capacity and your existing hardware 4 capacity, instead of being limited by regulatory approval in all the places that you want to go.
The regulatory approval is not as big a deal. Like, the thing is, the TAM is 25 million. So imagine that half of the possible municipalities, are
Is that
they're
the
slow.
TAM for vehicles in the United States
Yeah.
or globally, or
Right, that's just the U.S.
just the U.S.? Okay.
I mean, you can go other places too.
Yep.
China is definitely looking like they're going to be receptive. And that's an enormous market. It's bigger than the U.S. by the
But
U.S. is the
much
most
less
important market
compelling
because it's
economics.
yeah, because the rideshare pricing umbrella here is so high.
Yep.
So it provides this like ridiculous no-brainer economic argument for action.
Yeah, it is a very sensitive topic in the
Because
broader
you've got all
community,
these
because
owners that
Yeah.
have fear of abandonment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they've have the personal experience probably of having their old Google phones or Apple phones or whatever basically get bricked over time by new software.
Mhm.
But yeah, I usually try to help relieve people's stress when the topic comes up, but usually they don't believe me.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those things where, there's a false but emotionally compelling narrative which has taken hold.
Yep.
And it basically becomes true in most people's minds, even though it has no truth to it, because everybody's saying it. Right? You just
Yep.
hear it over and over again. And you've got the emotional fear that it might be true kind of driving you toward it also. Although, to be fair, the narrative, it's one of those narratives which is driven by a very vocal minority,
Yes.
right? They can make it seem like they're a much bigger segment of the group than they are, because they just talk so much. An interesting side effect of social media is that it has given more power to vocal minorities.
To the histrionics at the edges.
Yeah, I mean, because it drives attention. They're more prone to hyperbole, and hyperbole drives, attention. And they're more willing to spend a lot of their time talking. And so social media, like, as I'm sure you know, it's a giant, it's a bottomless pit of time sink that you can just pour stuff into.
Yeah.
So, like, somebody who wants to stand on a soapbox, they can, if you're willing, the longer you're willing to stand on that soapbox, the longer your reach is. Most people they're not going to waste their life doing that.
Yeah, and there is like a level of, I think, credibility that's given. People just kind of assume, like, if someone's really willing to spend this much time and energy and effort wasted on this thing, it must be for a legitimate reason.
Yeah.
Even
I think-
if you don't understand it, and you see someone who's willing to sacrifice a lot, and whether you process it as sacrifice or not, but just
I'm much more prone to thinking it just the psychology of propaganda applies, right?
Yeah.
And like, even if you know something is false, if you keep hearing it over and over and over again, you start to make room for it in your evaluation of things. Like, you can rationally know something is false, and you still find yourself being persuaded by it if you just get exposed to the story enough. When questioned, you'll still refute it, but your unconscious actions will be making space for it and allowing for the possibility that it might be true.
Yep.
And if you get a large enough body of people responding that way, there's the whole thing about how the tide moves in or out or whatever.
Yep.
I used to be really skeptical of the basic, idea of propaganda that it doesn't matter if something's true or not. It just matters how much people hear it. That's the only thing that matters. Like, famously, World War II propagandists relied on this thing, and so in historical accounts, I would hear this thing, and it's hard to believe. But then social media, you watch
or
it in
even
action.
mainstream media.
Things that are just completely absurd.
Yep.
A really large body of people end up sort of believing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require some, conspiracy. It just, like, the things can take off on their own, like the Hardware 3 thing. I don't think anybody's conspiring to push that narrative.
It is a ground, ground up.
I had the experience of being on the other side of this, where, like, when I was developing tech at a hot company that, the Yahoo groups were speculating because everybody was, like, gambling on the stock going up or down or whatever. And, I'd go to the Yahoo groups and I'd look and I'd see people who had come out with these theories about this tech I myself personally was developing. And, they'd have a theory about why some particular thing that they could externally see was happening. And it was just comically wrong. And what I would see is, I'd go back to the groups each day to, like, look at this stuff. And it would gradually just take it, more and more people would be persuaded. And then it would just be conventional wisdom after, a month that this is what was happening. Yep. This was just like some random guy's theory that just took off, and it bears no resemblance to reality.
This is the intersection where I think it was Sawyer where it bailed on the left turn and then went on to the next one to take the left.
Yeah.
But flawlessly executed this time. But anyways. Yeah.
It's just this very weird herd dynamic. Humans are super social, and we're prone to fear.
And I think it is, I guess, just a very interesting form of amnesia that we know that was a Robotaxi right there going the other way. It was the white one.
It's bound to happen.
That obviously this type of socialization, that's how kids learn anything growing up, is like, you're a squishy neural net with empty weights, basically, or not empty, but definitely not
Randomly initialized.
tuned. Yeah. And so you have to absorb all of that from the combination of your environment, it's the environment, but that consists of both people socially and.
Yeah. That's the first person I've seen that noticed this.
And it's like we think that, okay, once you grow up and you go through high school, and high school's like an incredibly powerful time where you get inculcated.
You're going through Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. By your social environment, and that's impacting everything you say, everything you do, everything you believe. And you think, oh, once you graduate college, that system just goes offline, and now you're this static set of weights.
There are so many cool little shops around Austin, driving around. I think that would be fun to go check out. The place has got tons of character.
Yeah, I haven't got to spend a whole ton of time here, but it does.
Waymo, it's got somebody in the driver's seat though.
And passenger. That's interesting.
No, passenger was empty. I think you saw the headrest.
Oh, maybe.
At least.
I thought I saw
looked to
two
me.
heads, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a little town south of Medford on I-5 called Ashland.
Yeah, it's Southern Oregon.
Times.
Yeah.
I love Ashland, and it seems like there's a lot of stuff in Austin that reminds me. There's a lot of that character that is here in Austin, kind of mixed in with the big city and the small.
Well, it stopped far enough back to give itself space to go around. planning horizons definitely really improved significantly on this. I'm wondering if the planner isn't operating gridless now, because for definitely on
What does that mean?
where they don't need I forget what the name of it is. The occupancy network as an input. The occupancy network describes a grid, and the things in the occupancy network, they get heavily weighted in terms of making decisions. But because of the compute restrictions, you can only have the grid go out so far. So then things outside the grid don't get well considered in planning decisions. But if you operate gridless, you're operating like a human does, right? Like we're not making voxels in our head.
Yep.
We're looking at things and placing them in space without that. Okay. Let's see. Get the trunk open. Thanks again. Have a good one.
You too.
This is interesting. It's not liking the blinking red light. Or rather, it's not ingesting it properly.
Figured it out eventually.
Yeah, that's good. Like, not just because media fabricates them, but also because, okay, interesting. Nicely handled. But Austin makes pretty heavy use of plastic bollards to separate traffic. And
Straight out. This will be interesting.
yeah, perfect, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is better than I think 13 handles. Just the bog standard 13 handles the parking lots right now. I think this is us. Looks like, or no, it's going to go a little further.
The pin is still up
Yeah.
a little ways, so yeah, I think it's just obeying
Go into the address.
obeying the stop signs in front of the thing.
Yeah. Okay. Tries to move out of the way.
Austin kind of mixed in with it, the big city and the small.
Well, it stopped far enough back to give itself space to go around. Nice. The planning horizons definitely really improved significantly on this.